Like every normal person, I want to get smarter, more educated, and a little bit less brain fried. And reading books seems like a great way to do that. So I challenged myself to read 100 pages every single day for 30 days. Simple on paper, tough in reality? Let's find out. At the end of 2024, I made a bold promise to myself. I'm going to read more books in 2025. And like every bold promise, I started doing immediately the opposite. I pretty much stopped reading whatsoever. Despite I bought huge pile of books for motivation. Meanwhile, my screen hours skyrocketed. I was doom scrolling, tapping my phone pretty much every time I was remotely bored. And slowly it started melting my attention span to a mush. I got fed up and I don't really want to be a slave to my phone. And so instead of consuming another 30-second video that I'm gonna forget literally in 2 seconds, I decided to take on this challenge. Thus, I'm gonna replace the habit behind this addiction. You can't extinguish a bad habit, you can only change it. So I quit social media and replaced that dopamine drip with reading books. And if I stick to my goal, I will read 3,000 pages, which is about 2 to 3 books per week, which is quite a lot. But the big question is it going to change my life? Let's break it down. First few days were quite easy. It's the typical motivation from the new challenges. I read slowly but confidently, which is quite impressive considering the fact that I hadn't picked up the book in almost a year. But quickly I ran into my first problem. I wasn't absorbing anything. I would just finish 20 pages and then start thinking, what did I just read? I even watched a few videos how to fix this problem, like how can I remember more from what I've read. Some of the videos were suggesting highlighting information, taking notes, and then reviewing them. But honestly, I know myself. I'm not gonna do this shit. I could take the notes, but I know that I will just never come back to them. So I decided not to bother with them because what for I'm gonna write them if I'm not gonna use them. But I found solution for myself and I will share it later. These days were quite rough. Reading started feeling like a part-time job that I didn't sign up for. I would read 50 pages, feel proud, and then remember that I had another 50 right before going to sleep. That was pure suffering. And so I tried something new that I heard from Naval Ravikant, because I know the way he reads the books. He can just pick up the book, he's gonna look at the content of the book, he's gonna start in the middle, then he's gonna jump to another page, then he's gonna drop the book, he's gonna start reading a new one. Obviously, I'm not gonna do that far. And what I did, I was reading a few books at the same time. So I could just start with the book 1, read like 30-40 pages, then move to book 2, read there like 30 pages, and then in the evening I would just like come back to the first book and then finish my 100 pages quota. And surprisingly, it worked, because switching books kept me more interested. But also here's what I learned. With some books I was forcing myself way too much to just sort of fill the page quota, but this way you will start hating reading. You can come back to it later or just don't. If you wouldn't force yourself to watch a boring YouTube video or a movie, then why bother with a boring book? Brick by brick, reading became a part of my routine. And around day 10, I fully quit social media, which helped me a lot to focus on those books. But honestly, I still had the issue to remember those other 50 pages. And so I tried another new thing. I started treating reading like studying, and I started using Pomodoro technique. It sounds kind of dumb to interrupt yourself from reading to sort of read better, but it works. Every 5-minute break gave me the space to think about what I've just read, because most of these books that I have, they aren't really easy reads. And so it helped me process the ideas and what can I implement in the future. And after doing those reading sprints, I ran into another problem. I was reading way too fast. I wouldn't even call it reading. I was literally scanning. I would just look for that golden nugget instead of actually reading and appreciating the story. I learned this in a hard way with the book How to Win Friends and Influence People. The thing is that it was my second time to read the book, because this time I noticed so many details that I missed, because back then I was also obsessed with reading way too fast. And so when I moved on to this book, I decided to slow down a little bit. Because of that, not all the days I was actually hitting 100 pages. I wrote these as my reading depth, but it actually helped me a lot. I managed to absorb the information much better, and overall the reading time was bringing me much more joy. On the third week, reading became almost meditative. I know that zoning out isn't the best when you're trying to focus on the book and get those ideas, but sometimes the ideas were so interesting that it would just like send me into deep reflection. So I would just read the book from Hormozy or from Russell Brunson and would just start thinking, how can I implement this sort of like business trick? But as I promised, here are the things that I used to improve my memory of what I read. First thing, as I mentioned previously, I slowed down. I started actually reading instead of scanning, because maybe with some of the books, scanning is much better than just reading slowly, because in my opinion, not every book deserves your attention, but with some of them, you just have to read it like literally word by word, because otherwise you just may lose the context of the things. Second thing, I dropped the books that I didn't like. As I mentioned previously, it's literally non-negotiable if you're reading for your own sake, and it's not just like some school assignment, and even if somebody I respect recommend the book, I will just drop it. Like, if I don't like it. Not every book is meant for every reader. By forcing yourself going through that book, even if you don't like it, it's just gonna make you to hate reading. I don't think that's what you want. And the third thing, I use ChatGPT summaries. Yeah, it sounds super weird to use AI for all of this, even though we're talking about reading and not just purely about getting the knowledge. But hear me out. Some people will call it lazy, but it helped me a lot to understand some of the complex or kind of complicated ideas. Like, for example, when I was reading Black Swan, I was going through the book, I was trying to sort of understand it. Maybe I was reading again, either too sloppy or too fast. I don't know. I wasn't really getting at first what this book was about. But then after I asked ChatGPT for the summary, it all made sense. I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't remember as much of that summary if I didn't actually read the book. And even though summary helped me a lot, but I don't think that you can just read the summary and just understand the book. Yes, it will give you the main concepts, but you will still not get as much as if you would just read the book and then read the summary, because then everything is going to be just like much more clear and you will just remember it for a very long time. And also then I understood that reading 100 pages also has another downside. You're finishing the book way too fast, and because of that you don't have time to reflect or let ideas marinate, because you're just moving on way too fast to the next book. But also, you will never remember everything that you read from the book. It's just impossible. But you can improve your memory by implementing the things. The final week was effortless. Reading didn't feel like a chore anymore. And you may ask, is it the famous 21 days to form a habit? No, I don't think so, at least. I'm pretty sure it was simply because I was reading the books that I genuinely enjoyed reading, like Shoe Dog or So Good They Can't Ignore You, and other ones. These books hooked me instantly, and I didn't need to force myself to read another 10 pages or 20. And before reading Shoe Dog, I tried to read 1984. And honestly, it didn't grab me. By reading around 30 pages, I understood that it's gonna just like made my mood sour. And since I already knew what this book is about, and no way that the government would do that, I just didn't want to continue because it wasn't really as interesting for me. And I just had so many other books that I can just read and enjoy and be sort of in a good mood. And so I switched to Nike's entrepreneurial journey, and I'm glad I did. Not every book is meant for every reader. It's still okay to just drop it and move on, because there are still so many other books. And it's time for the conclusions. Did it change my life? Did I finish the challenge perfectly? Not really. I needed a few extra days to actually finish the challenge, because I needed to drain that reading debt that I got from those days when I was reading slower than usual. That was around a few hundred pages, and it took me around 3 to 4 days, and you can judge me in the comments. But let's come back to the main question. Did it change my life? Not dramatically, and there was no magical transformation, but some things did change. First thing, I became more intentional with my time. Obviously, it is partly because I quit social media around day 10, and so there was a double effect. Reading plus no doom scrolling. Second thing, I understood myself better by reading very interesting stories from this book, or even reading another time the story of Hormozy. It made me think much more about that there are tons of people who have experienced what you are going through, and they probably felt much worse. But they pushed through and they won. By reading all those stories, I started thinking about that there were still so many people who went through similar kind of journey. They felt anxiety, self-doubts, and all those type of stuff. And when you read this, all this journey that was lasting, not a month, not a year, but around 10 years. And then they eventually succeeded. You start to realize that all of this is normal. Third thing, I started enjoying reading again, even though 100 pages a day, it's a little bit too much for me, but I still was enjoying reading most of the time, especially by reading something that I'm genuinely curious about. And the first thing, I finally felt like I wasn't a hostage of Doom scrolling. Obviously now it's 2026 and I got my socials back. I do doom scroll time from time, but I think that I still sort of keep it in mind that I shouldn't scroll for this much and I could just read a book or do something else. And the final lesson I will leave you with, it is from Ryan Holiday. Why would you want to read a book as fast as possible? You don't brag about the fastest sex. If you can have a conversation with Marcus Aurelius and other giants, take your time. I didn't quote him perfectly, but the idea is the same. Slow reading is better reading. And honestly, I heard this quote around the first week of my challenge, and I honestly wanted to quit because I understood that this is not entirely meaningless, but I could learn much more if I would just keep on reading consistently, but just like slower, instead of chasing 100-page quota. But I also had a thought that I want to finish what I started, and another thing, much better, to actually read 100 pages for like a few hours, instead of doom scrolling for the same time. And so my choice was obvious, and I did complete the challenge, not perfectly, but I still did. I hope that you learned a few things from this video, and thank you for watching. That's it for today.